Welcome to the Back on Track Achieving Healthy Weight Loss podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alicia Shelly. It is not uncommon for my perimenopausal and menopausal women to complain about the imbalance of their hormones that is affecting their health. They complain that they can't sleep well, they are irritated, they're having hot flashes, and then most importantly, they feel like they just can't lose weight. And so today I have an expert who is an expert in stress and hormone management who is going to explain to all of us today on how we can overcome these hormones that are impacting our health. Our guest today is Dr. Dana Gibb. She is an educator, a hormone expert, a board-certified ENT and allergist. She's also the CEO of Consultants in Metabolism, a direct care practice for thyroid, metabolic, and hormone management for women and men. Her practice is located in North Texas, and she offers live and virtual visits. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Gibbs. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell. And, the first thing people always ask is, well, but you're an ENT doctor. What the heck are you doing during hormones? And really my segue into doing hormones in the first place was thyroid management, because I've always been doing surgery on thyroids, and I kind of got a rep while I was an ENT as the doc who can keep you from needing surgery if you're, if it's not cancer kind of thing. And then, I just don't feel good with my thyroid half out and blah, blah, blah. And a big part of it was that I was a thyroid sufferer myself, and I never knew. I never knew through med school, never knew through residency that's why I felt so tired all the time, depressed, all the things. And when that information dropped into my lap, it was a revelation, and it's something that I haven't really been able to keep to myself ever since. And, as my career went on and I got to where I'm like, okay, now, it hurts to do tiny little stuff all the time under a microscope, and my neck is getting sore, and I got started thinking about maybe not doing surgery anymore. But I was just really, really passionate about hormones. And all along, people are like, well, but can't you fix my menopause too? And I'm like, well, no, I'm an ENT doctor. And the truth of the matter is, well, now I'm not. So I can do anything I want. And so I went out and got the education that I needed to help people with hormones. And it's working really, really well. And so here I am.
Share with us kind of how hormones affect our health, and why is it that we feel maybe unwell sometimes when they're
Right. Okay. So hormones are chemical messengers in our body, and there are dozens and dozens of chemicals. Well, they're chemicals. They're naturally produced, but they're chemical structures in our body that fit that role, and they go from one organ in our body to another organ in our body. One of the big ones that everybody's talking about right now is leptin, and you and I spoke about leptin a while ago. Leptin is made in your GI tract, and it goes to your brain, and it tells your brain, oh, we're full, we don't need to eat anymore, unless it's messed up, in which case it doesn't work, and then you never get that signal to stop eating. So that's just one example of a hormone. Some other ones are thyroid hormone that helps regulate our body metabolism. That's like the fire in the furnace to burn energy for growth and movement and brain function and everything that we need. So that's another big one. And then sex hormones. So, people think, oh, well, sex hormones are just for sex. Well, no, they're actually not. They have so many functions in the body. And one of the little quirks of nature is the fact that female humans lose their estrogen when they get to midlife. And, back 100 years ago, that didn't really matter because people's average age was about 55. They died about the time they went through menopause. And so there wasn't any point in not going through menopause or whatever. But in the modern age, when we women lose our estrogen and the other sex hormones, there's so many things that start degenerating and going wrong, and it's bone health, and it's heart disease, and it's mental health and depression, and yes, your sex organs start to atrophy, and there's just so much of it. And one of the things that happens when you lose estrogen is that you start developing something called insulin resistance, even if you didn't already have it before. And I will mention, so insulin is another hormone that I'm sure you have spoken about in much detail on your podcast for other things, but we can go into that a little bit. But the reason people get belly fat is because when you don't have estrogen, you start getting resistant to insulin. And what that means is even if your blood sugars are still stone cold normal, it takes more insulin to keep it that way. And the insulin has effects in your body, and it affects your lipid levels, and it affects what your body does with the sugar you take in, and it affects whether you deposit calcium in your blood vessels or not. It affects whether you feel depressed or not. I mean, insulin grows tumors. There's so many things that insulin does. And hormones, insulin and estrogen are like this. When one is up, the other's down, and they go like that, and it's kind of a little cool secret that after menopause, if you don't do anything about your estrogen, that men actually have more estrogen than women. And people don't realize that. So, people think, oh, well, testosterone is the man's hormone. Estrogen is the woman's hormone. Not true. The proportions are different. Men have high testosterone. They're supposed to have low estrogen. Women have higher estrogen than they do testosterone. But truly, if you look at the amount of estrogen that most men have versus the amount of estrogen that most women have, it isn't that much different. I mean, unless you're pregnant or unless you're in the luteal phase where your estrogen just goes up, and then you have more than a man has for sure.
Think about it. So we talked about some hormones, talked about thyroid, sex hormones, and then the insulin. For the thyroid hormones, if it's like too high or too low, what are some symptoms people should be looking out so they can discuss this with their doctor?
Okay. Yeah, well, so first I'll just give you a caveat with regards to the thyroid hormone symptoms is that so many symptoms that are related with thyroid could theoretically be caused by something else. And it's also possible and likely that if you have a thyroid disorder, that you also have some other hormone that's out of whack and also contributing to those same symptoms. So some of the symptoms, so like I mentioned that I had low thyroid when I was young. And some of the things that went wrong with me that were really noticeable as, okay, this is thyroid related, were the fact that my hands and my feet were just freezing all the time. I would go sit in a movie theater and everybody else is laughing and they're comfortable and I'm sitting there just, it's so cold in here, oh my God. And everybody else was normal. And I'm like, what? It's freezing in here. And they're like, no, it's not. So that's a really big one. That's kind of when people say I'm cold all the time, red flag. They're either anemic or they got thyroid problems, or sometimes both. Some other ones are you're tired, you're depressed, you sleep more than everybody else and you still feel tired. You may wake up at night drenched in sweat. Now that's a menopause hormone symptom too. Once again, they're kind of related. So, you lay there freezing and try to go to sleep and you're cold and you shiver and you can't fall asleep. But then in the night you wake up just drenched in sweat. So that's another big one. Losing your eyebrow hair on the sides. And, a lot of people have plucked their eyebrows until there's not a whole lot left. But some people, it's just like, they've got this middle part, but the side part is gone. And it's like, yeah, that's thyroid. Being able to see through somebody's hair to the top of their scalp is, when their hair is that thin, I always think thyroid right away. Being puffy in the area above your wrist and your ankle. So if your forearm is thick and your wrist is little skinny and then your hand is thick, then I go, I'm looking at that going, that's not right. And then ankles too. If your ankles are really thick, I'm looking at that. If your tongue is really thick, like to the point where maybe it even has scalloped edges on it, that's another thing I look for. But there are so many symptoms that could be many other things. But when I look at somebody who's hypothyroid and I ask them those, they're like, yeah. So vertigo. People don't think about vertigo. Vertigo, if there's no other explanation, can be thyroid. Hearing loss, same thing. And those two are back from my ENT days, of course. Recurrent bouts of sickness, like upper respiratory infection, sinus. I can't tell you how many patients I had where I fixed their thyroid and their sinus problems went away. And that wasn't even what they came in for, They didn't come in for thyroid. They came in for sinus. And for some reason or another, they couldn't have their sinus surgery until next year or something. I'd be like, I think you have a couple of thyroid symptoms. Let's check. And they'd come back 6 months later and say, I don't need surgery anymore. I just want that thyroid hormone refilled. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's great. I love doing sinus surgery, but that's really awesome. So that's another one. There's a condition called anergy. When somebody says, I have terrible allergies, but they go to the allergist and they get tested and nothing. There's nothing on the test. That's called anergy. And I saw that all the time because I was doing allergy tests. So that was another thing. If somebody came in and they're sick with their upper respiratory, there's no virus, there's no bacteria, they have, what looks like terrible allergies or even chemical sensitivities, send them in to get allergy testing. Nothing. That's thyroid. That is thyroid. So those are a few. And then, of course, everybody's thinking weight gain. Everybody thinks their weight gain is related to their thyroid. And truthfully, more people are right than get given credit for, because there are several ways where your thyroid tests can look normal and still not be right. Your thyroid's still not right. And we can talk about that some more if that's something you think your audience would be interested in. But it gets kind of technical, so I'll leave that up to you.
I did wonder if you could give us some more symptoms on, like, if your estrogen is low, what are some symptoms of menopause that people...
Right. Okay. So the first ones, the classic one that everybody thinks about is hot flashes. But truly about 40% of people don't get significant amounts of hot flashes in any significant way. And so they think, oh, well, I don't need to do anything about my menopause. Well, I don't believe that that's true. I really feel like almost everybody at least ought to get tested to see where their estrogen levels are, because some people never totally lose it, but most people do. And so night sweats, I mentioned night sweats. So a night sweat is really just a hot flash that happens while you're sleeping. Not being able to sleep well, waking up repeatedly throughout the night, having to get up to pee more than once a night. 0 is normal. 2, 3, 4 times a night, that is not normal. Not being able to fall asleep, waking up at 3 a.m. Those are menopausal symptoms. Being depressed, 50%. There was a study I saw not that long ago, 50% of new onset depression in the age over 40 is related to hormones. 50%. I was like, dude, don't accept antidepressant prescription until you get your hormones checked. Because, wow, 50%. Bones start to get thinner. And that happens very slowly. But we know it's not just a natural aging thing, because if somebody goes through early menopause, say they have a hysterectomy when they're 35 instead of going through menopause when they're 50. Those people start exhibiting the symptoms of bone loss 15 years earlier than somebody who doesn't go through menopause until they're 50. And if you give them estrogen, guess what? It stops it. So that's huge. The increase in heart disease, the increase in brain fog, this memory thing. Here, I'll tell you a funny one. This is a funny on me, because this happened about a year ago. So I've been menopausal for a while, so I can talk about this from a personal experience as well. So I got my hormone prescription and I didn't read it. I got it from the pharmacy and I didn't read it. And I went home and I was putting it on every day. And about 10 days after I'd been into that new prescription, I went through a drive-thru and I said to the lady at the drive-thru, I'd like some of those little stick things made out of potatoes. And she goes, you mean hash browns? And I go, yeah, that's it. I have a friend who can't remember what the refrigerator is called. She calls it the cold place where you keep the food. And I'm like, so this word finding, if you start noticing yourself word finding or forgetting your friends' names when it's like you've known them for years, forgetting words is a symptom of menopause until proven otherwise, as far as I'm concerned. So that's a biggie. But even if people sail through menopause and they don't have any of those depression, they don't have any hot flashes, they don't have any word finding. Still, the effects of losing those hormones in your body is really insidious and progressive and gets worse over time. And if you don't stop it in time, then you can't. And I'm particularly thinking about heart disease and stroke risk. So one of the things, there was a great big study, and I'm sure you've heard of it. It's called the Women's Health Initiative. And they tested women who were on average over 10 years out from menopause. Some of them were 20 years out from menopause. And what they found is that those women who were close to 20 years out from menopause, if you started them on hormones when they had never been on them, it actually worsened their risk for heart disease. It worsened their risk for stroke and dementia. And so there's a window when you can start hormones beyond which they can cause problems. Another study that I heard about, this was my cardiologist that was telling me this, and I was fascinated. He said, we did studies on blood pressure, and we put little sensors inside women's blood vessels, inside their arteries. Volunteers, of course, not just... and we checked them, and we watched as we gave them estrogen, and we watched their blood pressure drop. And he said, as you got into and started to get past the point of menopause, if a woman had been without hormones for 2 years and you give her estrogen, her blood pressure now doesn't drop any. So when do you start estrogen? You start it before you lose it. You don't want to wait until you're full on menopause. The maximum benefit that you get from it. And I have a lot of heart disease in my family. And so I'm right on this. I am much more likely to die from heart disease than I am from breast cancer, for example. So I'm like, I'm starting this before, but that, that's just me, and other people may have different opinions about that. In my opinion, the best time to start it is before the symptoms start getting too bad and before you have your last period.
And it's important too that for everyone individually to talk with their doctor about what's their best, what's their best course of action, because when the doctor looks at their health history, their family history, and then symptoms, it's important that you see for them to do that.
Yes.
How do people, because I know with the thyroid hormones, if they're imbalanced, normally you take medications to kind of help with balancing that. Are there other modalities that people can use if it's like you said, sometimes it's not right, but it's normal on their lab work?
Okay, so let's talk about that a minute, because there's 3 ways that your thyroid can be messed up. 2 of them don't show on a thyroid blood test. That's the standard thyroid blood test. One of them, the main way that people think of is that your TSH is high, and they move on to the next kind of test, which is generally the free T4, and they find out that's low. That's kind of your classic hypothyroidism or low thyroid scenario that most doctors know about. But there are 2 other scenarios where the TSH may be elevated, but the T4 is still okay. But if you dig further into the labs and you check the free T3 and the total T3 and the reverse T3, you find that they don't actually have enough T3, which is the active form of the hormone. And the reason for that is that the signal in your brain to turn off the conversion to T3 is actually T4. And what we give somebody who's hypothyroid is T4, levothyroxine. Or that's what mostly the guidelines say. This is what you give somebody with low thyroid. And the problem is you get to a certain level of T4 and it turns off your production of T3 far beyond what the level of TSH is going to indicate. So you can have a completely normal TSH and still not have enough T3. The third way that you can have something going wrong is that there is another hormone. There's a third one. So we think of T4, which is the active, the storage form of hormone that's first made in your thyroid, and then T3, which is what your body cells make out of T4 to actually activate your metabolism. But the third one is something called reverse T3. And reverse T3 comes online for various reasons. Calorie restriction is one of them. So dieting. And people don't realize this. When you yo-yo diet, you are shutting down your metabolism, because what happens is your body is given the signal, now don't make T3, make reverse T3. And the problem with reverse T3 is that it blocks the action of the T3. So you could look like you have enough T3 and not, because you have so much reverse T3. And if your doctor never checks, then you never know. So I do a lot of that kind of checking. As basically when somebody comes to me and they think they have thyroid symptoms, or when I look at them and I go, I think maybe you have thyroid symptoms, I always check all 5 of the thyroid hormones. And it's total T3, reverse T3, free T3, free T4, TSH. One of the reasons for people to get that elevated reverse T3 is Hashimoto's disease. And Hashimoto's disease is an autoimmune disease. And, if you read the literature, they say the average age of onset is 35. Well, I don't believe that, because I just found 2 16-year-olds that had it. I just talked to a lady who said, oh yeah, I was diagnosed when I was 18. Oh, I had it when I was 12 because I caught mono and that triggered it. And the problem is, because most doctors don't know how to manage it, and because the defect that you get first is that high reverse T3, people get told, oh, there's nothing to be done about it. And the truth of the matter is that there is plenty you can do if you know what to do. So that's kind of how thyroid works in a nutshell. I mean, there's so much more to it. But one of the things that you can do, if you don't have Hashimoto's and you just have low T3, stress is a huge suppressor of thyroid, because there's another hormone that we haven't really talked about yet called cortisol. And cortisol is the stress hormone. Stress hormone is made by your adrenal glands. They're above your kidneys in your body. They're signaled by your brain to release stress hormones. And the higher your stress hormones get, the lower your thyroid goes, for a couple of different reasons. One, it makes you lower your TSH, which lowers the amount of hormone you make. And 2, it triggers that funny reverse T3 thing. It says, don't make any more T3. We need to conserve energy. And so you make this reverse T3 and it puts a block on your metabolism. Another thing that cortisol does that a lot of people don't realize is that the higher your cortisol is, the more that insulin resistance goes up. So that's why people who are stressed gain weight. That's probably why people who don't sleep enough gain weight.
So it's important to get a good night's rest and reduce your stress.
Yes. Well, here's the thing about stress. I mean, people are like, oh, well, I have a stressful life. I have stress. And I'm like, no. You can control your stress, because what's better for you, worry or prayer? Okay. Prayer, and you say that and you go, well, obviously prayer. Well, why? Why is prayer better than worry? Your brain focuses on what you imagine. If you imagine the worst, if you have one late bill and you imagine, oh my God, we're going to get kicked out of our house and everything's going to shit, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to swear. It's going to be a disaster. If you have this habit of all or nothing thinking, then your brain and your imagination goes haywire, and your brain goes, stress, cortisol. And if you have a late bill and you're like, okay, we're going to get through this, you're going to help me, and you imagine that you're lifted and you're supported and you're being taken care of, what do you think that does in your brain? Reduces your stress. It doesn't have to be prayer. It can be meditation. It can be activity. Anything that takes your mind off of imagining all these disasters. So yeah, you can control your stress. You absolutely can control it.
What other daily habits should somebody employ if they're trying to maybe balance out either, you mentioned the thyroid hormones with the stress, sleep, anything else, or maybe with the menopause?
Okay. Yes, absolutely. But besides going to your doctor and getting checked, what you eat is so important, because insulin resistance responds to what? It responds to carbs and sugar. And I don't mean every carb. I mean simple, processed, starchy, sweet carbs, like a soda, which is full of corn syrup, a piece of Wonder Bread, which is laced with sugar and you put it in your mouth and it turns to sugar immediately. that shoots your insulin high. And so it is, especially once you hit menopause, way more important to be aware of what you're putting in your mouth. Eat some almonds if you want a crunchy snack. Eat some carrots if you're like, I need something a little sweet. Okay, eat some carrots. Eat an apple. Don't drink apple juice. There's no fiber in it. There's nothing to slow the absorption of that sugar. So yeah, there's a lot you can do with your diet. There's things you can do with your supplements. I have a whole course on this, actually. It's important to make sure you get enough minerals. Here's, even if you're eating a lot of vegetables and good protein, you may not be getting enough minerals, particularly selenium, zinc, magnesium, chromium. There's several others. And you don't need a lot of these, but you need some, because a lot of the proteins and the processes in your body depend on those minerals to work properly. And if you don't have them, that's selenium is huge for thyroid. And so, there's not that many different kinds of food that have selenium in them. And people are all, I'll eat Brazil nuts. Well, the problem with Brazil nuts is it really depends on where that Brazil nut was grown as to whether it has enough selenium, not enough, or way too much. And you can eat 4 Brazil nuts and be toxic on selenium. Yeah, so it's really, I mainly put people on a mineral supplement that has zinc and selenium in there. And then magnesium, so many people don't get enough magnesium in your diet. And if you don't have it, you can get cramps, you can get headaches, you can have trouble sleeping. So there's a lot of that. So those are some more things that you can do is, a good multivitamin, multi-mineral supplement, or maybe even a trace mineral supplement. One final thing that I just think everybody, good grief, they ought to put it in the water. Vitamin D. Yeah. Vitamin D. Almost everyone. If you're a lifeguard in Miami and you're on the beach in your bathing suit every day, maybe you're not deficient, but all the rest of us pretty much are, unless we're taking vitamin D. And it does way more than your bones. I think, those 16-year-olds that I was talking to you about that got Hashimoto's disease, that's an autoimmune disease, right? Both of them were ridiculously vitamin D deficient. And, they have not done studies with vitamin D and Hashimoto's specifically, but they've done studies with vitamin D and other autoimmune diseases. And if you get your level up above 50, it prevents a huge amount of autoimmune. Huge. It prevents a huge amount of cancer. There are all kinds of studies now that show that people who are vitamin D deficient got more and worse COVID, way more and way worse COVID than people who had a lot of vitamin D in their systems. Cancers. Almost every kind of cancer I can think of, if you have plenty of vitamin D in your system, your chance of getting that cancer is cut by 20, 50, 70%. Huge decreases. So, I don't know, I could talk all day just about vitamin D. I'm sorry, I'll stop now.
Spending a little bit of time with us today and just sharing about hormones and the imbalances and how it affects our health. Would you mind maybe sharing with somebody how somebody can work with you?
Sure. So my website is www.danagibbsmd.com, and all my stuff is on there. So every week I do a live video on some topic related to hormone. Sometimes I have guest presenters, you know that. We did one just last week together. That was awesome. But every week I do a different hormone topic, and those are all on my blog, on my website, and available for anybody to watch. If you sign up for my email list, then every time I put something new out there, you'll get notified of it and get it in real time. Or if you just want to make an appointment, the appointment link is on there too, because this is what I do every day. I help people with their insulin levels, with their thyroid, with their cortisol, with their weight loss, with their testosterone and estrogen, all of that stuff. Happy to help. And, it's really important to be aware of these kind of things because so many people aren't.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gibbs, for coming tuning in and sharing your knowledge with us today. If you all enjoyed this podcast, thank you again for joining us and listening to the Back on Track Achieving Healthy Weight Loss podcast. Please feel free to share it with others. Like it, subscribe, and don't forget to leave a 5-star review. And we'll see you all next time.